are here for conversations about and within the African diaspora. Tonight, we're going to hear from Dr. Andia Augustin-Billy, who you all mostly know as Dr. Abe. Dr. Augustin-Billy received her MA and PhD in French literature and language from Washington University. She also earned a certificate in women, gender, and sexuality studies as part of her graduate training. Her research interests include analysis of gender and sexuality in the 19th and 20th century French literature, travel literature, and themes of migration and exile in Francophone, African, and Caribbean literatures and cultures. Dr. Caree Banton is an assistant professor of Afro-Caribbean history at the University of Arkansas, who is jointly appointed in history and African American studies. She is also the head of the African and African American Studies program. She received an MA in development studies from the University of Ghana in July 2012 and completed her doctoral work at Vanderbilt University in June 2013. Her research focuses on movements around abolition, emancipation, colonization, as well as ideas of citizenship, Blackness, and nationhood in the 19th century. Her book, More Auspicious Shores, Barbadian Migration to Liberia, Blackness, and the Making of the Liberian Republic, explores continuities and mutabilities in Black experiences of freedom, citizenship, and nationhood across the Atlantic world. So I am very excited to get to see you both this evening. I'm going to ask if you would mind just starting by introducing yourself briefly, talking a little about your research and yourself and how you position yourself both as a scholar and within your scholarship. Andia, would you like to start?
No, I'd like for Dr. Banton to go first. I hate going first.
Dr. Banton, would you take us away then?
I'm too nervous to go first. So Dr. Banton, please.
All right, no problem. So as Dr. Grove mentioned, I am Caree Banton, and I'm currently at the University of Arkansas. As you might have heard her say, I'm from Jamaica. I've studied in Ghana, and I finished my doctoral work at Vanderbilt. When I got to Vanderbilt, I thought I was going to Vanderbilt to do a project which I had done in my master's degree at the University of New Orleans. I thought I was going to look at the intersection of dancehall music and Jamaican politics, how politicians co-opted music and how musicians co-opted politics, and all that was happening during that transformative Cold War period in the 1980s. And then my advisor was like, do something else. And so that's how I arrived at my current project that looks at Caribbean people going to Liberia. I happened upon it, in a library research project, thinking, my advisor does not want me to do this music thing. What else am I interested in? I'm interested in Black republics. Haiti, was one of those republics I knew had struggled with its diplomacy and how it was received by the world after emancipation. And so I was like as someone who had studied foreign diplomacy, I'm like, how did other Black nations like Liberia, how did they manage that? And so I started looking for Liberia, and I came up with Gerard Ralston, who was a white colonizationist from Pennsylvania, and he was the consul general for Liberia. And I found a letter that he had written to a number of Barbadians. And I was like, why are Barbadians writing to this consul general in Liberia? Barbadians are British subjects. Liberia is right next door to Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a British crown colony. Should they be trying to be, or should they be interested in going to Sierra Leone? Anyways, I dug further on, and it turned into this whole big story. Turned out they had written to him. He had written back to them. They had sent petitions to England, all of these kinds of things. And I come to find this whole story about Liberia, where all these Black people, as this Black republic, where African Americans, Caribbean people, African ethnic groups, 14 different African ethnic groups, and a category of people who during emancipation and after emancipation were called African recaptives, were lodged in Liberia. So I'm like, this is a Black cosmopolitan space, right? And I am like, this is all the things that I love. All the Black people are together in one place. And I've always had those interests, growing up in the Caribbean, of course, whether you want to or not, Marcus Garvey, ideas about Africa, you get that kind of, education. And as someone who was always interested in the Rastas and Ethiopia and all of those kinds of things, it was just something that I gravitated towards and immediately knew that I would, put my passion and my love into. And then, being in the United States, I have African American friends. I play soccer with the Africans. I am, inviting them over to eat Caribbean food, and we're all having these discussions about, oh, what do you call this in your country? What do you call this in your country? And all of these things. So diaspora in the Black Atlantic and different kinds of Black people, something that's always interested me. So I was very happy to find a project that could tie together all of those interests. And so, I was like full steam ahead.
It is remarkable what you do, and I would just like love to travel with you to Africa and discover a lot about what you've done in the past. So thank you for all that you contribute to the field. So for students who are watching, or for people who are watching, me and Dr. Banton, we come from different disciplines. Dr. Banton is a historian, so she gets to do things in a more, I would say, proactive, like hands-on way, as opposed to me, my training is literature. So I look for things through literature, a different way. So I was born in Haiti, and Haiti is the first Black country to be independent. I am often upset, or I don't know, I go through all the range of emotions, because whenever they're talking about Haiti, it often follows by the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. So Haiti as a country, as a cultural entity, has fueled my research, but I am also interested. My work has revolved around the relationships between literature, history, and the emancipation of bodies in physical spaces in cultural borders framed within the Atlantic world. When I was growing up in the Caribbean as a pastor's daughter, I was aware that the silence around same-sex desire was pregnant. And I was curious to look at transgression, or look at the ways in which construction of gender and sexuality in the Caribbean are written about, or not written about in literature. So I went about in my dissertation as an excavator, right? I try to excavate for literature, for stories, all sorts of genre that address issues that were close to my heart, same-sex desire in Caribbean literature. Initially, I wanted to do a comparative work, because the Black Atlantic relationship is important to me. The way Africa speaks to the Caribbean, the way the Caribbean echoes the Caribbean, that sort of like back and forth call and response that happens within that Black Atlantic relationship. I got a pre-dissertation grant and I traveled to Senegal and I went there. I remember I went to Université de Saint-Louis in St. Louis, Senegal. And I met with a sociologist and I was interrogating about same-sex relationships. And he looked at me, he was like, "You are so pretty. Why are you interested in this topic?" And I was like, so that was Africa for me, and because of the lack of material around that topic, I dropped the comparative aspect of it and focused only in the Caribbean. So my dissertation was called Bodies in Transgression: Exploring Same-Sex Desire in Contemporary Francophone Caribbean Literature. So I am excited about our talk tonight and excited to see where our research merges and where it differs, and what we can learn, what I can learn from Caree, because Caree is like way ahead of me in the field. But I am super, super excited about our talk tonight.
Thank you both. I love hearing both of you talk about your research and how you came to it. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, I think in particularly US history, we get really bound up in national boundaries and forget that the world is interconnected in exactly those ways that Andia just spoke about. Could you talk a little bit about the way that it sort of shifts our focus if we consider history from within the Black Atlantic instead of within a single national bordered region?
Absolutely. I think thinking within the framework of the Black Atlantic enables us to see, first of all, many of the things that I think about and study in my time period, it would be anachronistic to study with the frame of the nation state in mind, right? Because nation states are modern developments. And so to kind of superimpose those physical boundaries around efforts and movements that were happening, at the time, say for instance, in the early, in the 17th century or 18th century, right? If we, what we call the early republic in the United States is really, probably a little bit Native American history and Black Atlantic history, because American history, America, or the place that we call America, does not exist until later on. So studying it within a Black Atlantic frame enables us to see the connections, the ways in which the roots of certain cultural and political maneuverings, especially we think about the enslaved people. If you think about Gomez's work, exchanging our country marks, right? The making of African American culture, right? You necessarily have to see that within Atlantic framework, because the people who become African Americans, came here as Igbos and Hausa and Ewe and Yoruba and Ashanti and so on. So to say African America without thinking about those connections would be kind of to cut that off and to hide what's happening culturally, and to suggest that culture happened within discrete boundaries, right? That there's a borderland that once you cross it, these kinds of processes, stop. And so thinking about these kinds of development from a Black Atlantic perspective, definitely, uh, you know, uh, would would be would make a lot more sense than to think about it within the frame of the nation state. Uh, Additionally, I think I'm thinking about one additional thing that is missing me right now. India, would you like to go? And I probably could come back to it.
Um, so, Jema, your question was the ways in which how could we talk about
I think particularly I'm interested in the way that, like, when we move away from these sort of national boundaries and these
mhm,
nation state restraints, the Black Atlantic really lets us understand a lot of that, I don't know, like call and response that you were
mhm,
talking about,
mhm,
sort of first drew you to your research, and the way that the Caribbean is in conversation with Africa, and the both of those conversations are occurring in a larger realm. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what it can help us see when we
mhm.
pull back to.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's to locate the centrality of the Black Atlantic when we're talking about history and when we're talking about uh, the evolution of America, the evolution of Africa, the evolution of the Caribbean, and most often than not, the centrality of the Black Atlantic or the Black Atlantic tends to be discarded. For instance, when we are talking about the French Revolution, well, the Haitian Revolution was happening in tandem with the French Revolution, but the Haitian Revolution does not get to be talked about as much, right? And
Mhm.
that's where one has to bring in race and the way those racialized bodies, and also the fact that they were subjugated, their conditions in their race, how those factors contribute to this inequality. And of course, this is I am treading on you and on your and Caree's domain here, but how those categories tend to be overlooked when we're talking about the importance I mean, what is important to history when we're studying history. So like Caree said, we cannot talk about boundaries as of the nation state as rigid and organized the way they are now, because it is a modern undertaking. But it's again going back and digging and giving proper place, bringing back from the margins and the shadows the rich history of these places and cultures and how they inform even today American culture and American history.
Yeah, and I think, once you stop things at the national boundary, you're unable to see the connections. And so as a good historian, looking for all the possible links, I think you have to consider that, right? For instance, um, Vincent Brown talked about in his recent book, Tacky's War, right, in 1760, and the impact that this rebellion that was not at all successful, so we think,
Mhm.
right, because it was put down, but the measures that were put in place had profound effect on how slaveholders would treat their enslaved people, not only in Jamaica, but in the other 13 colonies in North America, right? So it would, and so many other instances. Andia mentioned the age of revolutions, right? All the exchange of ideas going across the Atlantic. If we think about the movement of disease, which we call the Columbian Exchange, the movement of ideas, the movement of people, the movement of flora and fauna that, wasn't in one part of the world, now it's on the other part of the world, the movement of populations of people, right? Those things are significant to study, not within the bounds of the nation state, but as a Atlantic phenomenon.
Yeah, it has to be studied as a continuum. For instance, going back to the Haitian Revolution, the echoes reverberated throughout the South, to the point where in New Orleans, in Louisiana in particular, okay, not only Louisiana is Louisiana due to the fact that Bonaparte lost, Napoleon lost the war. That's why we have the purchase, but the echoes of that revolution reverberated to the point where there was a sort of a decree, or it was forbidden for people of color from Louisiana to have any contact with Haitian people. In our Constitution in 1805, Dessalines, who was one of the founders of the revolution, first of all, I thought it was, of course, revolutionary. First of all, he declared that anybody, regardless of race, you set foot in Haiti, you, regardless of your color, race,
you're black.
You are black. Point blank, you are black. And a lot of the soldiers who were fighting, they were from Poland, Polish soldiers who were fighting. They were in such awe of these ragamuffin soldiers, like fighting for their freedom, that they decided to switch sides. They switched sides. They left the Napoleon army, and they went and fought with the Haitian soldiers. And to this day in Haiti, you have this colony of descendants of the Polish soldiers. So there was that. Then you also have the language, right? Haiti was a Francophone country, and you have all these ideas of freedom, these ideas of revolution passing by illegally, and they're trying to censor that in New Orleans, and all these Creoles of color in New Orleans, they were inspired. This poets and authors, Victor Séjour, many of them were of Haitian descent. Even there was I don't want to it went to the Supreme Court. I want to say, no, I don't want to say it because I am not 100% sure, but all these Duplessis versus Ferguson, they are of Haitian descent, right? And again, it is through a continuum, right? The borders are not, they're not rigid, they're not neatly organized. That call and response that I referred to, it was central and vital to the Black Atlantic framework. And I think that's wonderful.
I love both.
Inspiring.
Of them. Yes. I think the idea that we get so locked into this national framework that we forget that is anachronistic, that was not actually the experience of people who were living in this interconnected world. I'm going to try and actually use that as a connection point. So you both are interested in migrations and the aspirations that migrations represented within the Black Atlantic, but then you also have both moved through that same space, and in some ways pursued education and taught and learned in different places within that Atlantic world. Can you talk a little bit about, are there similarities that you see between your own experience and the aspirations, the migratory ambitions that you study?
Oh, absolutely. Thinking about the long chain of migrations coming out of the Caribbean post-slavery that I study. My migrants go to Liberia in 1865. Lots of Caribbean people are going to Panama Canal. They're going to Cuba to cut cane. They're coming to America during there's a hidden great migration from the Caribbean that comes up to United States into New york during the Harlem Renaissance. People like noted poet like Claude McKay and lots of radicals, Herbert Harrison, Marcus Garvey, all of those people. So obviously migrations, build on these kinds of networks and the kinds of information that people send back that kind of fuel further migration. So so for sure, I study a group of 346 Barbadians who go to Liberia in 1865, saying that they would like to go and help African Americans to build up a Black nationality, because without having a Black nationality, they didn't think that the race would make it within the family of nations, right? So there was a little bit of respectability politics at work with these Barbadians as well. What I look at in my research is how the experiences of these groups of migrants in the Caribbean before they leave, so experiences of freedom, citizenship, nationhood, and experiences of race. And once they get to this place called the Black Republic, what are the experiences of freedom, citizenship, and nationhood, and what does Blackness mean to them? Who gets to define Blackness in a Black Republic? Is it the Caribbean people? Is it the African Americans? Is it the Africans whose territory that they are on, right? And I look at how colonized people circulate and revisit the oppressions that have been visited upon them onto other Black people, right? And so Barbadians who are fleeing white supremacy and racism and oppression go back to Africa and visit the same white supremacy, racism, and oppression onto Native Africans, recreating their own version of the caste systems, apprenticeship, and creating this very, oppressive, segregated society until the Native Africans rose up in 1980, that led to a decades-long civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people, And I think about that today with, relative to mine and other Caribbean migrants to not only the United States, but other places. I don't know if you guys recall, like when Trump was going to run, everybody was like, if he wins, we're going to Africa. And I'm like, like, oh, that has been done before, But I think about it now in our current society when Caribbean people, I see now with Caribbean and African people expressing probably a little bit more solidarity with African Americans, especially after Trump, especially after Bojan Jean was killed in Houston, right? And I guess, seeing how Blackness don't know accent, right? But aside from that, Caribbean people internalize They want to be the pick-me Negroes in my view, right? Where they enjoy being the token Black people, the good Black people, right? That white people like, oh, you're so hardworking. Why can't the African Americans do that?
Mhm.
If you know, if Caree can come from Jamaica and get a PhD, why can't the people in Chicago do that?
Mhm.
Right? Without having done any kind of critical, assessment of, the socio-economic and political situation that might drive me from Jamaica, as opposed to the conditions that put the people who are in Chicago in those kinds of sociological situations,
Mhm.
right? And so Caribbean people, in my views, internalize that, and it can be a way in which it breaks coalition and it breaks down solidarity
Mhm.
among Black people, because
Mhm.
that hierarchy, when they're fetishized by white people,
Mhm.
um, tends to be, tends to be the breaking factor, where they come to America. A lot of us are in America because African Americans fought during the civil rights movement that led to the Hart-Celler Immigration Act,
Mhm.
of 1965. Barack Obama's father came here during that time. Before that, it was quotas that largely brought Europeans and people of those ilk to come to the United States. And so, similarly to the people that I studied, when African Americans in the Civil War was like, okay, so they're fighting a civil war. I think it's about our freedom. We're going to stay in America and watch and see. That enabled the Barbadians to go to Liberia, because Liberia was created for African Americans. It was not created for all the Black people in the world. It was created to remove Black people from America so that they would not disturb slave property. They would not agitate and be mischievous. Denmark Vesey, when he said he had a vision and was sending to help from Haiti to start that rebellion in Charleston, South Carolina, was a free person. And so they didn't want free Black people in America to stay here. So they wanted to create a colony to move free Black people to another place, like they had done the Indians and all that kind of stuff. So you know, uh, things done by another group open up opportunities for others. Similarly, Marcus Garvey came here, fought for a lot of, the Black pride and all of that stuff. For all of us as Black people, you thought about the collective upliftment of all Black people. So um, I situate myself in my story in though I can see those kinds of parallel. Right now, I'm writing an article about indigeneity in Africa, but I start at the election, where people are questioning Barack Obama's Blackness. They're questioning Kamala Harris's Blackness, right? Because she's of Jamaican lineage, and there's a group now of African Americans that call themselves ADOS, the American descendants of slaves. And, they are suggesting that, Caribbean people, African people are coming here to the United States and taking over opportunities that are supposed to be African Americans. I recall being at Vanderbilt, and when I went to the Black people meeting between the Black law students, the Black graduate students, many of them, well, one of them in particular said that um, Caribbean people should not get diversity scholarship, and there's merit to that claim, or some merit, so I see all of these kinds of issues fighting over what is supposed to be scarce resources, but it's often structured. It is a structured scarcity by white supremacy, right? That gets us to fight among ourselves over scraps. And so I see similar issues in my life and the people who I study in the 19th century.
I think white supremacy, Carrie, is where I'd like to start when you talk about the ways in which Caribbean people have internalized racism or colorism. Well, it has its roots from white supremacy. For instance, with the 1835 Code Noir, 1865 Code Noir, that literally had an amalgam of
90,
yeah
90 shades of blackness, quadroon,
exactly.
octoroon, 1 million roon.
Exactly. So when you have that, literally you have the state, not the state the way that we understand it, like in the modern way, but when you have the power of the state literally enacting this sort of how can I say this? Literally, you are commodified based on the color. Your value, your worth is based on the color of your skin, the shade of the color of your skin. And it started for so long, and it is passed down from generation to generation. And that solidarity that you are talking about, it's hard for it to take shape. It's hard for it to be enacted. I have been Black in different countries and different cultures, right? And it's always funny for me to see how my Blackness changes depending on the space, right, that I am in. Uh, and also with my husband, because my husband is darker skin than I am,
right.
and the way his Blackness also is judged and valued. In Jamaica, for instance, we were talking earlier, when we were in Jamaica, my husband Blackness was more celebrated than my Blackness. Okay. In France, I am the good Black. Why? Because I am from the Caribbean. I have assimilated to French culture. And so depending on my accent, how my accent shifts, so it's several things. It's the color of your skin, it's your accent, whether your accent is close to the mainstream culture in which the space that you are in, and also class. You mentioned how, for instance, people would ask, people would say, like, Caree, why can't, or tell the Afro-Americans, like, okay, Caree came from the Caribbean, she was able to get a PhD, why can't you? And I have seen that a lot very, very, very early on. And I participated in a panel, and I've told my students this story several times. When I was in grad school at WashU, the panel was, who are the Afro-Americans, or do you consider yourself to be African American? And they asked me that question, and I said, no, I do not consider myself to be African American. I am Haitian American. And some Black people who were in the audience were offended.
Annoyed.
Yes, they were offended because they thought that I was, and also,
they separate yourself.
Yes, that I was trying to be superior. And there was a friend of mine. She was a grad student in social work, and she was from Trinidad and Tobago. And she mentioned when she came to the United States, when she was coming to study, her parents told her to stay away from African Americans.
Oh yeah.
Because they are different, and that she needed to be careful about how much socialization she is doing with Blacks, so that their Blackness, which is steeped in negative connotation or stereotypes, will not be splashed on her. And I was like, yeah, me too. I had the same experience, because when I was going to high school in New York, my mom told me the same thing. Be careful because for my mom, what she knows of Black people is what she sees on television. And when you look at Exactly. And when you look
Yeah.
at the media, they are not trying to uplift the race. They're not trying to depict a positive portrayal of Black people, even on campus, even here at Centenary. Whenever there is a crime alert, I am bracing myself whenever I see that the so-called suspect is Black,
Yeah.
because it is loaded, right? It is loaded in history of Black bodies being demonized and criminalized and etc. But anyways, categories of Blackness, they vary, they change, they shift depending again of you know where you are, what space.
Yeah.
And I remember when I went to Senegal after the earthquake happened in Haiti, the president at that time offered land to Haitian folks to go to Africa. And they're like, no, 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 we're not going to Africa. No, 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 we'd rather stay here in Haiti, because in their mind, Africa was like the no man's land. And
Right.
there's no way Africa could be better than their current conditions in Haiti.
Right.
And so when I went to Senegal, I met with Haitian students who were studying there, because the president ended up giving them scholarships to come study. But again, it's funny, it's fascinating, it's amazing to see how we are all Black, so we all share a lot of that history and its legacy. But then depending on what island you're from, depending on what country in Africa you're from,
We're racialized in different ways. Yeah.
yes.
Because I remember when I came, so I've been to a lot of schools, y'all. So I went to Grambling State University, which was a historically Black university. And I remember leaving West Virginia, which was the first university I went to, and going to Grambling. And when I went to the club with all the African Americans and whatnot, and they were doing the bunny hop and all of that, and I couldn't do the bunny hop, I thought they had a convention and taught everybody the bunny hop, and I was somehow not invited, and I felt so excluded. And I didn't know what fraternities and sororities were. I wanted to join the Omegas, because I didn't know that history yet. But same thing when I was studying in Ghana, to make fun of me, sometimes they would call me Obruni, which is, maybe I don't know what it's called in Gabon or Senegal that you study, or it's similar to Oyimbo or whatever. It's like foreigner, right? Which is like hurtful, because I'm like, Jamaicans are from Ghana. Welcome me home like a proper person,
Right. Right.
And you're like, they'll tease you and call you a Bruni, and it's like, spear to the heart.
No, what happened to me in Senegal was I went to a place to buy a souvenir, and there was like a bunch of men, like they were tailors, they were sewing, and they looked at me and they started speaking to me. They were looking at me and they started speaking to me, and I was like, the friend I was with, I was like, I don't understand. What are they saying to me? And of course, you feel like so foreign at this particular time, right?
Right.
And here you are trying to blend in, and the language like sets you apart. And that's when they told me that I looked like a pearl, which is a tribe, a nomadic tribe, and I look like them. When I was in Tunisia, same thing happened. They thought I was from the south of Tunisia, okay, because the people who are in the southern part of Tunisia are dark skinned, and so I looked like I was from the south of Tunisia. When I traveled to Venezuela, they thought I was Colombian because the
Yeah.
Colombian tend to be darker.
Yeah.
When I was and it was funny because in Colombia, in Venezuela, my host felt compelled every time that he saw a dark-skinned person,
To
to point out to me that they were from Colombia. And I was like, okay, I know you have Venezuelans who are also dark-skinned, right? Why do you feel, and for some reason, I felt this shared sort of like a kindred spirit with Colombia right away, because I was being put in that category. I was being racialized and I was being otherized, because at that time, Colombia and in Colombia and Venezuela, they were having issues. When I went to the Dominican Republic, I was told that I was not Haitian. Why? Because I was lighter skinned than the darker Haitians who tend to be migrants. And so I have had very interesting and enlightening conversations or points of departure around the visible markers of race in where people try to box you, or categories of where you belong, based on visible markers of race, and what people assume, depending on that look, where you belong or don't belong.
Did we take up too much time?
No, the point of this is for you to take up all the time. I do want to invite the participants to put questions in the Q&A box. Please use the question and answer box, because we may or may not have fixed the chat box. So I might not know if you put a question in the chat box. And while I give the participants time to load questions in, I wondered if the two of you might talk just a little bit about the value of Black studies, why African and African American studies programs are important, and how that can sort of help us across fields. I know that here you all are you're in different disciplines, but I think a lot of what the sort of big questions you're asking are very closely aligned. So if I can get you to just kind of sell African and African American history or African and African American studies programs for a couple of minutes.
So African and African American studies are extremely important, right? And this is probably why they've been kept at the margins of universities for so long, right? Because I think much of these area studies, whether it's African American studies or Latin American and Latino studies, or Middle East studies, or Jewish studies or gender studies, right, actually challenges the university in such fundamental and critical ways, right? African American studies is also particularly important because it helps to shape a particular mindset, right? Because of what the program focuses on, the attention to intersectionality, the kinds of nonlinear thinking that is encouraged, a diasporic and comparative analysis and perspective, right? Exploring themes of oppression and resistance, and then solidarity with other oppressed groups, whether it's gender and sexuality studies, right? Now, the institutionalized nature of Black studies probably, should give us some kind of pause, because we know that with institutions, the university as it currently exists, many of these institutions, I'm sure mine is, and probably yours is too, are historically white supremacists, and once you get a revolutionary program, remember Black Studies came into the university where students had to stick up a lot of these university spaces and demand to learn about themselves, demand curriculum that would teach them about themselves, because so that they could go back to the community and make the changes that were necessary, right? So when you get co-opted into a white supremacist system and they kind of capture and encircle your political horizons, that can do much to blunt the kinds of radical nature in which Black Studies came into the university with. But, you know, Black Studies, has, before it came into the university, has a long intellectual tradition that has always tried to make those connections, to Africa, to other parts of the diaspora, thinking about, the critical ways in which, racialization happens in different parts of the Black world, thinking about the overlap that is often neglected in your American history courses, forcing you to look and to find the voices of people who have been silenced through, necessarily means that you have to create different kinds of methodologies. And so, of course, once you have any kind of Black Studies under your belt, and I think going forward into the world of work or going to graduate school, I think it signifies to those people that, again, you've been involved in these kinds of nonlinear thinking, intersectional thinking, you've been taken seriously, ideas about oppression and resistance, how to think about those, and a broad comparative perspective that will only make you seem like you've done all the necessary things that show you to be a critical thinker. So Black Studies, I think, is very valuable.
Yeah, I agree. You could not have said it. I mean, I could not have said it better. I would add empathy. The same way that you do gender and sexuality studies, you study underrepresented fields, it really stretches you and it expands you. My colleague and I, we teach Paris Noir, African Americans in the City of Light, and we see when we take our students to Paris, the sole focus of the class is to illuminate, teach our students about Black bodies that had to leave the United States to go to France to escape racism, and we can see how it transforms our students just because they did not know anything about that history. And African American history is world history, it's American history, it's human history. So why not learn about it? It's absolutely essential.
Thank you. That was beautiful, both of you. We have actually a question in the chat, and we are coming up on the end of our time. But the question is sort of a nice way to wrap up to begin with. So the question is, for upcoming generations of Black people, and I would add for the young Black scholars on this call, do you think there is an approach that they can take to remove themselves from internalized colorist or classist views? How do you fight back against that?
Could you repeat that, Jema?
So the question is, for upcoming generations of Black people, do you believe there is an approach that they can take to remove themselves from the internalized colorist and classist views that sort of permeate the sort of web of white supremacy that operates throughout the, at least American culture, North American culture?
I think for one is understanding, acknowledging that they exist, right? That colorism is white supremacy's foot soldier, right? Well, certainly, once you're aware of it and you are, um, I think once you're aware of it, like once I became aware, I'm like, race is constructed. So all these hierarchies is constructed. There's nothing inherently more, valuable to white people or to lighter skinned people, that this was all constructed for whatever economic or political purposes, right? And that all lives are inherently valuable. I think the point of departure from there, I think, will lead to a number of different things. Then you are less likely to kind of deploy those kinds of colorist or classes. I went to a very fancy boarding school in Jamaica where, it was built with slave money, and at one point only white people could go there, then light skinned people, and then they kind of monetized it so that the darker people could then buy into that. And so a lot of the prestige now, it's now top 5 in Jamaica, top 3 actually. And a lot of that prestige is associated to that exclusion of Black people that it had, back in the day, in the same way that Harvard and a lot of these places, right? That the exclusivity is what we that really what assigned the prestige. That there's a lot of demand and they don't let in a lot of people, right? So once you learn how these structures exist, right, and if you have a mission, if your mission is to uplift oppressed people, you can do that from anywhere, right? That then ways not to redeploy those tropes or tactics, um, on other groups. And so I think awareness is key.
Mhm. I agree. And I would say being intentional.
Yeah.
I have 2 dark-skinned boys, and I am working. Okay, so growing up in my family, my mom is light skinned. I am the darkest one in my family, and I grew up very, very self-conscious about my skin color. I have had a very difficult relationship with my mother, and I thought in my tortured mind whether my mom does not love me or did not love me because I was not light enough. My hair, my sister has long flowy hair, and growing up my mom used to beat me with a brush because I was so tender-headed. I was traumatized growing up because my hair had a mind. My hair was rebellious. My hair had a mind of its own. And I grew up feeling not so pretty, feeling that something was wrong with me. And I had to be intentional about loving and embracing all this all these things that make me Black. And now I'm not there yet, but I am working to instill in my boys to value and love their skin. For instance, these are very quickly ways that I go about it. Cartoons, a lot of the cartoons that have white characters, that's fine. It's okay. But I try, for instance, to have African cartoons. I buy books. I go to the library and I have books with Black characters. I in my son, who is 4 years old, he's already aware. Like he says, I'm orange. That's the color of my skin. He says I'm orange and Daddy's Black. Um, I mean, it's there. We can't avoid it. But what is important is to ensure. So we are very careful, my husband and I, when we're talking to talk in ways when we are, first of all, not to say this Black person or this whatever. It's so hard because ever since I discovered that I was Black, it's been hard for me not to say white or Black. But we are intentional at ensuring that our kids have a deep pride in who they are as Black people. And within the Black community, we just need to stop, be intentional, be aware, and stop upholding that invisible hierarchy that we do, like light skin on top and Black skin at the bottom. We do it. It's so ingrained in us, but we need to deconstruct that again, it's an intentional work at undoing years and years and years and years of residue of putting out, of vomiting years and years and years and years and years and years of white supremacy BS. And you can't do it overnight, but with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the natural movement, because talking about my hair, for instance, my mom would say, okay, you have a PhD, you are a doctor now, your hair shouldn't be like this. You should, you know what I mean? It's, try to suppress as much of your, of what makes you Black. And I'm like, no, I want young Black people to see exactly that I am a professor, I am a college professor, and I embrace my Blackness in all its glory, right? So, we need to be actively engaging, actively engage in dismantling this white supremacy ideas that have been passed on. Make sure that we don't repeat them, make sure that we don't give them life. And that's one way that we can get rid of a lot of the damage, or not to inflict the damage to younger generations.
Y'all. So you both have a quote that came out of that gave me chills. I dropped each of them into the chat. I'm probably going to embroider them on something at some point. So one of those was, colorism is white supremacy's foot soldier, which I think is a beautiful, succinct way.
I read that somewhere. That's not mine. So
I don't get to attribute that to you?
No, well, that's not mine.
Well, good job pulling it out, because it is amazing. And then be intentional about loving and embracing all things Black. Mm-hmm. Because whether you're being intentional or not, mm-hmm. that sort of, the aura of white supremacy is seeping through, right? So mm-hmm. that is absolutely beautiful. I could listen to the both of you all night. I actually am, my cheeks are sore because it makes me happy when you talk, and I've been grinning the whole time, but we are over time. So I am going to call us to an end, and thank you so very much for coming tonight. This was,
I want to tell the students that if you have Jema as your professor, that she is one of the loveliest persons I've encountered, and I know students tend to, shy away from office hours and things like that, but when she says she will help you, I know for a fact that she will go out of her way to help you and to ensure your success. So don't be afraid to take advantage of that. She is an amazing person, amazing human being, but also a very smart and wonderful professor as well.
You're gonna make me cry, because
bye.
You're my hero.
Girl, bye.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for coming. This was my favorite Zoom program. I hope you have a great evening.
When we get out of this panoramic, we'll get together.
Yes, in actual human form. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yes.
Oh, there was.
Oh, wait.
Oh, there are like 2 more questions.
There are 2 questions in the chat. If you are happy to continue, I'm happy to continue.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So One of those is, how have you experienced overt or covert racism during your international travels compared with here in the US? Dr. Banton, I know for a fact you have a story about this. And what is your advice to overcome negative interactions such as racialization and to educate others?
Well, I remember the first time I experienced racism actually was not in the United States. It was in Munich, in Germany. I was at Oktoberfest. I was a soccer player in my youth. And I went to go visit friends in Germany, and I was, called the N-word in the Straßenbahn. And another time I would say I experienced racism. I'm sure it's happened a number of times, but I was at a conference in Ghana. After I finished studied, I went back, a famous African professor. They were having a conference, based on his contributions to African history, and I was there. And I lived in Ghana and studied in Ghana, so I kind of knew how Ghana worked. And the Ghanaian, the person at the counter at the airport, was insistent that I needed a certain identification, I needed this and that, and I'm like, I've done this like 12 times, so I don't need that. She would not listen to me until the professor, the white professor who we had convened the conference for, came up and said, Caree, what's going on? And she was like, oh, and this and that. And, and he was like, no, she does that. And so, that's one of the ways we internalize, white supremacy. Even as Black people, it's like the Black voice does not count, right? And it has to be validated. It's like Phyllis Wheatley, like her poem, no one would believe that she wrote her poems, right? And John Randolph had to write a note that, like, yeah, she did, she really did write them by herself. Mm-hmm. And so he had to come and co-sign for me. So several instances like those. What was the second part of the question, Gemma?
How could we help educate others about these sort of various forms of racialization when those occur? I think it is often much more shocking, right, when you discover that race works so much differently in this new place. How do you respond to that in a way that's constructive?
Nowadays, I spend most of my time fighting institutional racism at the University of Arkansas.
Preach.
Trying to, open doors for more Black, Native, Hispanic, and those kinds of people to come in, to get rid of racist statues and, the ways in which they've caused, they've carved whiteness into the concrete and into the system. So I don't really take seriously. I laugh when people are like, if you ever saw that Toni Morrison interview and she's like, what are you without your race? Are you tall? Are you strong? Right? Are you resilient? Right? Because I feel sorry for people who are ignorant enough to like think that this figment that was created by the imagination of people who wanted permanent labor to work their tobacco fields is now a thing that they have over me. So I don't really spend time. I don't think it's my job to educate Karens or Felicias or anybody. I don't spend time doing that. What I do is try to create, I tackle institutional racism, right? Try to maybe create the kinds of coalitions at the university that would create more power and more space for marginalized people.
And that takes a lot of courage, which I am lacking, which is shocking to people because they see me, they're like, oh, she's a fighter. But I would say at Centenary, and I was talking to a colleague of mine. That's why I admire Jema so much. But Jema came with a fire in her belly. And I think part of, allowed her to be such a force of nature at Centenary is her whiteness. And I'm so sorry, Jema, I'm not calling you
No.
out, but and as the only Black professor here on campus until very recently, and as probably the only Black professor being tenured in Centenary's college, almost 200 history, I was particularly aware of how my Blackness could be a liability. And as much as I'm very, very proud of my roots, and I'm very, very proud. Like, I give you 2 seconds to meet me and you will know I'm all about my history and secure in who I am as a person of color. Institutional racism is real and hurtful and damaging. And so I have not been okay at Centenary to be all that I can be. So that's like to respond to the latter part of what you have said. So travel, I have traveled a lot. I have been to probably 25 countries. And I have not, microaggressions, yes, that's everywhere. It's hard. I have not been called the N-word. I've not had the honor, I guess. It's hard for me to, but my positionality shifts and is different. Like, I give a couple of examples. When I travel to France, I have a love-hate relationship with France, because French people, they're
not racist,
everywhere.
they're just French.
Yeah, they're very polite in asserting their white supremacist views. And again, because I am the good Black person, I am educated. I am, my accent is not as strong. I'm more like exotic.
The fetishized,
Yes,
exoticized.
that's the way I have been racialized, through this sort of fetish, exoticization exoticization of my body. Um, um, and again, I mentioned how we can combat, or counter, give a counter narrative to racism. It's by being intentional and proud about our roots and uplifting everybody. I see a Black woman, the first thing I try to do is compliment. What do I see in that Black person, in that Black body that I like? And I will find something and I will compliment that person, because it's all about uplifting one another, because there's too much negativity, too much toxicity towards people who look like us. So I am intentional, again, with my family, with my children, because I'd like for my 2 Black sons to grow up in a world where, you know, they feel comfortable moving as Black men, right? It's such a burden, though.
That exoticization is part of the racism, I think, too, because
it
I
certainly
think
is. That's why I put it in that category.
Yeah, it's like they see Caribbean people as exotic, right? It's like, oh, you drink rum, and even in my class, Jama can tell you, it's like nobody want to study race or colonization or imperialism. Like, oh, let's study pirates and voodoo in Haiti and poverty and AIDS, all the stereotypes that they have of the Caribbean and Rastas, and they don't want to touch the big topic. And so it allows them to kind of exoticize the Caribbean as this kind of like, non-threatening people. And then they use that against African Americans, like, oh, they're going to protest and they're savages. And, and because they encounter us in resorts, especially Jamaican, when white people go to Jamaica now, they encounter Jamaicans in resorts where we have to be subservient to white people. We have to be servants in these modern day tourist plantations. And so there is no pushback because you want that tip, right? And so So you know, when they try to talk smack about African Americans, because they're like, oh, you're the good Caribbean person, I'm like, what you said?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What? Who you think you're talking to?
Mm-hmm.
No, I really, you know, I really let them know that my politics is Black liberation all day,
Right.
not Caribbean liberation. All Black people, until all of us are free, none of us are free.
Amen. Amen. I
Okay.
agree. I
Yeah.
totally agree. I totally agree with that. It is also the sexualization of Black bodies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially for Black women. This sort of you know, objectification, and we see it in pop culture, and this sort of, you're from the Caribbean, uh, um you know, sun, sand, sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
I taught that's the name of one of
Yeah,
the
they
courses
watch
that,
all of these cool running ads on TV, and then they expect you to be just as like, oh, innocent, and you know, they don't expect you to, you know, have any kind of radical, you know, it's supposed to be sun and sand, and you know, that's how they think of the Caribbean. They remove the Caribbean is a landscape for
yes,
relaxation. There are no people there,
yes,
you know,
yes,
they're
yes,
islands. They're not
yes,
nation states. You know what I
yes,
mean? So
yes, yes.
yeah.
Very good.
Absolutely. I have now added modern day tourist plantations to the chat as phrases I am keeping following this panel. We have one other question that was submitted, if you all are willing to sort of to take the
Sure.
time. This is about actually France and the way that racialization is different in France and perhaps changing. What was it about France that was more forward thinking in welcoming free Black people than other countries earlier, up until the early 1900s?
Mhm.
And do you feel that this viewpoint has shifted in recent years? My interpretation is that that is asking about the sort of recent um, exclusionary politics of contemporary France.
Mhm. Carrie, you go
I
ahead.
thought, you know, since that's your domain, but France France has a idea of racialization where they don't collect racial data, and you know, everybody is French, so Martinique and Guadeloupe, and you know, if they have no data, it's like race. What? I don't see color.
Mhm.
What you talking about? You
Mhm.
know? Meanwhile, when you go to France, as Fanon and Amy Césaire and all those who discover, it's like
Mhm.
my blackness is
Mhm.
a problem,
Mhm.
right? Not
Mhm.
only must I be black, I must be black in relation to the white man. Oh,
Mhm.
look, a Negro,
Mhm.
you know? And so
Mhm.
um, France has tried to be this color blind, just like Brazil and all of these other societies. But the fact that you don't collect this racial data, or and lots of these European countries, right, like to put off and say that's not us, that's the
Mhm.
U.S., and you're so obsessed about race,
Mhm.
you know, where while they are systematically oppressing Black people in their
Mhm.
country,
Mhm.
and in the uh, to I a few years ago I was to go to a conference in, was I think that was Martinique, and I would have to go to Atlanta to get a French visa, and I was like, I guess I'm not coming because I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. So have a good conference because
Yeah.
I won't be coming. You know what I mean? You still own colonies. You're
Yeah.
still exploiting Africa. Africa has to, you're charging them colonial taxes, you
Mhm.
know, to keep forcing them to keep money in your central bank, and starting coups across African countries every other year.
Mhm.
So, you know, friends, you know, you can kick rocks. I'm not
Yeah.
about friends
So
at all.
France's France's motto is liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity. And it's about the citizen, not not the racialized body. And they do that also with religion, right? They are laïc, so there's no religion. It's all about rallying around mother France, except that it is highly problematic, like you said, Carrie, because France has colonized Black countries all over the world, And so when, and it's interesting because Jacques Chirac famously had an amnesia when he was in the Dominican Republic, and they asked him, you know, Haiti is a former colony of France. They're always having political instability. What do you think about their political situation? And Jacques Chirac was like, well, we never colonized Haiti. You're like, really? Like, why would these Black people speak French? But anyways, so France does not use race on any forms at all. They find it anti-republic. They won't even entertain the idea of having race on any sort of forms, or try to collect data on racialized groups. Yet they have very problematic, tense relations with former descendants, residents and citizens who derived from their former colonies, notably North African, the Maghreb, whether it's especially Algeria. There have been many more quote unquote terrorist attacks on France than there have been on American soil. And a lot of that tension comes from France wanting its citizens to conform to ideals of what francité, what Frenchness is all about, which is ever changing, ever elusive, because unless you are white and European, you can't ever be French. So why was France more welcoming? France was more welcoming to Black Americans, because Black Americans are in different categories of Blackness. Who were the Black African Americans who were migrating to France to escape racism? There were entertainers, there were writers, there were already in a field that contributed immensely to French cultural capital. Now, at the same time, France was welcoming to Richard Wright, to James Baldwin, to Josephine Baker. It was highly discriminating against migrants from Senegal. They were treated differently. Again, there are categories of Blackness that are attractive to the dominant cultural mainstream, and when Blackness is not as palatable, when it's not compatible religiously, culturally, well, France does not have much on the US. Look what they did in Haiti. I mean,
Haiti had to pay back how much money until 1947?
Oh my gosh.
France.
Yeah, and so that's why I said I have very, very mixed feelings about France. And when I teach Paris Noir, I am careful not to depict France as this Canaan land that it was for all Blacks, because France committed atrocious crimes, like crime against humanity, when it comes to Haiti. And the legacy, if Haiti is one of the poorest country, if Haiti agriculturally it's not producing, it's because France soaked up all the good soil from us producing sugar, cotton, you name it, to Europe. And so if France is developed to the point that it is developed just like America is built on the backs of Blacks in this country, one can say the same for Haiti and friends. And so as a Haitian person, I cannot in good faith look at friends and give it a pass on race. I can't. It's just as simple as that.
Absolutely.
It's
Well, and I think that that whole discussion is such a beautiful illustration of how a single national focus or a single set of national boundaries can so terribly distort the larger story of how race is functioning and what work it's doing.
Mhm.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you all for having us.
I appreciate it
Thank
so much.
you.
You all
All
have
right.
a great
Thank you.
evening. I am going to shut us down if no one else has any questions. No, it doesn't look like it. I appreciate you both.
Be in touch, Andia, and
Yes.
we'll talk. Yes.
It was super nice meeting you, Caree.
It was amazing meeting you, and I'm sure we'll be taking trips together.
Yes.
I'm sending a united email as soon as I hang up on this.
Perfect.
All right,
I
great.
look forward
Talk
to
to
it.
you guys soon.
All right. Bye. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jema.
Thank you, Jema.